I don't like living in a place where I feel like I have to watch my back all the time and think of the cops and think of 1 in 5 identified as Asian, and they said they all had experienced racism at work. That, in my opinion, is pretty significant. How's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Boma, and in today's video, we're talking about the most racist cities in Canada. I have lived in Canada the past 10 years. I currently live in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. Let's talk about what you need to know and the cities I think you should avoid in terms of racism. If you're curious about this, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Leave me a comment to let me know your opinion. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow. Thank you so much for doing that, and let's get started. If you're watching this video, let's just get it out of the way. Racism in Canada exists. I'm not here to debate if racism exists in this country or not. I'm making this video under the assumption that it does. I'm a Black woman after living in Canada for 10 years. I also work in this field. I can confidently say that racism in Canada does exist. What are the most racist cities in this country? I have not come up with some magical racism meter. I'm just gonna be basing it on news articles and what's out there in the media. Not to keep you in suspense, but I'll be sharing some of the statistics and experiences of people and then revealing the city afterwards. So you gotta watch till the end to know what I'm talking about. So the first city, that Maclean's article about the most racist city in Canada, they talk about an experience here with Brian Sinclair, an Indigenous 45-year-old who died from an entirely treatable infection after being ignored for 34 hours in the emergency room. For decades, the Friendly Priority City has been known for its smiling lefty premiers, pacifist Mennonite writers, and a love affair with the Jets. Winnipeg is arguably becoming Canada's most racist city. Racism exists all over this country, and Winnipeg does have a high percentage of First Nations people, and it's very unfortunate that people have sort of associated being First Nations or being a visible minority or whatever with negative stereotypes. This writer does think that Winnipeg is one of the most racist cities in Canada, but is there any sort of statistics or facts to back up this claim?
Is there systemic racism in your police force? Is there systemic racism in the RCMP?
Well, I can't speak for the RCMP, but if you're asking if we have systemic racism in our organization, I'd have to say yes. I mean, I'm part of a justice system here in Manitoba that has a prison population that's probably 60 or 70% Indigenous. I'm in a province that has over 10,000 kids in care that over 80% of them are Indigenous. So something's not right.
I'm going to refer here to an article from the Winnipeg Free Press, which talks about the experiences of racism faced by healthcare workers. I've mentioned in a previous video, and I'll put a link in the description box and have a pop-up on the screen, that about 40% of healthcare workers in Canada identify as immigrants. That is a significant number, 40%. I mean, think about that. And this article here is talking about a healthcare worker from the Philippines called Jerome Espital. He's part of this campaign in response to an increase in racist incidents, many directed against Asian Canadians. Espital says he's aware of racism and xenophobia and welcomed the invitation to join the campaign. His employer prevents him from identifying where he works for media interviews, but he's found Winnipeggers to be welcoming and accepting because they're more familiar with diversity. A lot of the staff here in Winnipeg are international. People in Winnipeg are starting to acknowledge and are knowing that they will be taken care of by a person from another country. They are getting used to it. He says this has not always been the case. A recent survey of healthcare workers in Manitoba said that 1 in 5 identified as Asian, and they said they all had experienced racism at work. That, in my opinion, is pretty significant. I have to say, racist city apparently #1 is Winnipeg. I've never been to Winnipeg, so I cannot share this from personal experience. But let's move on to our next city. In this city, a Black person is 20 times more likely to be shot dead by police. Fewer than 10% in this city are Black, but they account for 30% of police use of force in incidents that result in serious injury or death, and 60% of deadly encounters with police. And the city I'm talking about is the wonderful city of Toronto.
There is systemic racism.
Without a doubt. And I think that policing institutions more and more are at the place where they can say that. Anti-Black racism is real. Systemic racism is real. and it is here. And it is not just in policing institutions. It's in our education institutions and, quite frankly, in our health institutions. I think when we try, as organizations, to almost deny that exists, I think that is when we really start to take steps backwards.
The City of Toronto website says anti-Black racism still exists in Toronto, especially in the biases we hold that inform the decisions and judgments we make every day. This article from Toronto.com says systemic racism makes life harder for many Ontarians. We have a quote here from Raki Ruparelia, an associate professor at the University of Toronto who teaches about racism, and she says systemic racism, also known as institutional racism, exists here. Many Ontarians either benefit from it or are disadvantaged by it. And they give an example here of healthcare, specifically the underrepresentation of systemic groups in the medical profession, barriers to healthcare screening, and unconscious bias contribute to a lower level of care for racialized people. In education, they give an example here of public education, school policies, curriculum, and staffing choices that create barriers to academic success for Black and Indigenous students, regardless of their academic abilities. And it also manifests in the high school streaming practices that tend to steer Black, Indigenous, and low-income students away from courses they need to take to qualify for university based on false assumptions about their academic abilities. They also talk about criminal justice, which I mentioned earlier, which is that racialized people are subject to higher rates of discretionary arrest compared to white people accused of the same crimes, denial of bail, harsher treatment behind bars, fewer options and opportunities for plea bargaining, and overrepresentation in prisons, especially pre-trial, before charges against them have been proven in court. Based on this, it seems like Toronto is another racist city in Canada. I've been to Toronto many times, and I have to say I've not experienced more racism in Toronto than I have here in Victoria. The thing you need to know about Toronto, and the thing you need to know about places like Winnipeg as well, is the fact that there are more racialized people in those cities. And I think because of that, there's just more racial tension. It's something I'm not a fan of. Obviously, as a Black woman, I'm very aware of racism. It's something I think about a lot. But you know what? I think living in Victoria, I feel a lot more safer here. I don't feel like I need to constantly be checking my bag to see if the cops are around, or checking my back worried about the criminal justice system. I have experienced racism myself, but I think that those experiences kind of seem few and far between. While for a lot of people, I think for a lot of racialized people in Winnipeg and Toronto, I think that experience of racism is a lot more severe and maybe more frequent. So those are the two cities people consider to be the most racist in Canada. Again, racism exists everywhere. It doesn't just exist in Winnipeg and in Toronto. It exists everywhere, and it may look different in different cities. You know, some cities may have a bigger problem with racism in healthcare, while Toronto has a pretty big problem with policing, for instance. There's so many examples of racism, and it looks very different. So don't discount Winnipeg and Toronto just because of these examples. Do your research, visit, ask people who live in those places to tell you their experiences as well. I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and connect with me on my Facebook group, Boma Nation, where I answer questions about life in Canada as well. Good luck in your immigration journey, and I'll talk to you soon.